So this topic that we're going to have a panel discussion on, this is something that Mike mentioned in his session during lunch. You know, we overestimate the impact in the short term, underestimate in the long term. Privacy is this supremely boring topic that puts you to sleep, but it will change. It changes markets, right? Depending on how the privacy laws are structured or not structured. Earlier this year, SIM and the 4As decided to commission a study around the intersection of state privacy laws with TV. Because at a national level, privacy has an impact. At a local level, privacy is starting to have a very, very large impact because states are coming up with their own privacy laws. And so I have a few frameworks and charts to show, but honestly, we're going to discuss more deeply during the session itself, where SIM and 4As were really eager and interested to understand what is going to happen, or what would happen, or what's the forecast, what does the industry think that is going to happen. And so we came up with Think Medium and the Shulman Advisory Group came up with a good framework for the industry to sort of think about privacy and its impact on various tools, technologies, companies in the space itself. I'm going to quickly show this chart. I'm going to ask Dennis and Julia a few questions that will explain what this chart is a bit more. But essentially, as part of this project and study, and if you have not seen it, please find someone from the 4As and we'll send it, or it's on our website, and please download it, because we went through extensive depths of, 35, 40 different categories of implications of privacy across all of them. So for example, what happens to panel-based surveys versus what happens to multi-touch attribution in the digital ecosystem. End of day, privacy is netting out to be a consent framework. Panel-based surveys, you are taking consent before you move forward. The digital stuff, sometimes you are, sometimes you don't. The user doesn't know, becomes a problem. So for those of us like me who have lived through GDPR, we are just seeing 50 variations of GDPR, which is a very, not a happy place to be in. And so the sooner we kind of get used to the frameworks and how to think about it, I think that's going to be more useful as we progress in this space. And so what I quickly want to do is move into a Q&A where John, Dennis, and Julia will not only talk about how we thought of the study, but what exactly we did and what are some of the key themes and outcomes out of it. So, John, first question to you. Since the 4As and SIM commissioned this study, and I remember chatting with you before the study itself, have you heard what's happening? And the 4As does extensive work in the government relations, privacy, what's happening on the Hill, what's happening with Congress, what's happening with laws, blah, blah, blah. And so I remember chatting about the potential impact. And so a question to you is, from the agency side, obviously very eager to understand what the intersection is. I'm curious why SIM decided to partner, and how do you think your members are going to really use the outcome of the study itself?
Cool. Well, thank you, Ashwini, and thanks, everyone. It's great to be here. I should say, first of all, before I say anything else, that we've partnered with Ashwini and the 4A's team on a range of projects, and they are fantastic partners. So it's been really, really great to engage, and we're very much looking forward to engaging with you and partnering on future projects. Yeah. The privacy study was, the genesis of it was very straightforward. The world of TV and video just got much messier and more complicated and more exciting. And we were finding through our conversations with our members that there was no real consensus about the impact of federal and state level privacy laws on their services and solutions. So obviously in the old world, when you go back 20 years and we were using opted-in panels and mainly consuming linear channels, it was a much more straightforward, arguably slightly duller, but much more straightforward world from a privacy point of view. Today, SIM's members, and it's worth saying for those who don't know, SIM is a coalition of companies from across the entire ecosystem. So it's buyers, sellers, agencies, platforms, measurement vendors. We have about 100 members, including all of the trade bodies. So we try to be the place where companies can come together to do the projects which genuinely help to lift all the boats. It's not there for the partisan work. There are lots of very good stakeholder bodies already representing those folks. So what the goal of a project from our point of view was really just to build understanding and awareness of the new, more complicated ecosystem of TV. And just to make that real, you know, we have networks who are transacting across literally dozens of partners. They're using data from numerous companies. Do they fully and completely understand the potential risks they're facing? And to your question about what do we want to do with it, it was very much to use the tools that Dennis and Julia did in this fantastic study. I do recommend it to everybody, to create something that could be taken away by companies who could use it then to assess their risk, you know, where they really had work to do and what they might think about doing in the future.
So Julia and Dennis, I remember when we first started discussing this study, it was almost like subscription versus non. Like if I've subscribed, I've given you consent, please, you know, store my data, blah, blah, although I have not, but that's what a subscription sort of has come to mean. Non-subscription is, you have no rights, so please ask me every time. So on the screens, you know, we put a sample framework. I would love for you to explain just how the framework was sort of built, but also a broader question about where do you think privacy as a whole is going overall in the US? Because if we're really going to go by state, this is going to be a pretty messy pickle for all of us.
Should I start and then hand off to you for the privacy piece in particular? Okay. Well, first of all, great to be here. I'm Dennis. Secondly, it was really wonderful to work with the 4As and SIM on this project. Thirdly, Ashwini, that's the second time in less than 24 hours I've heard you describe a topic as supremely boring. I don't agree on this one. This is
No. You missed the second part. It's boring and market moving.
No, I heard
Meaning we don't pay attention.
But it's not
We're like,
even
oh
boring.
my God, I don't want to read it. But it is going to change everything of how we are going to deal with anything.
And it's the flip side of privacy is data strategy, right, in a lot of ways, and solution strategy. And so, yeah, I think that's exactly why it's so market moving, is it impacts, you know, every aspect of your business, buy side, sell side, intermediary, it's there. So the study that the report we put together attempts to put structure around a really complex market-moving topic, and it's comprised of these multiple frameworks that kind of stack on top of each other. So the first one is just who are you in the industry, from buy side all the way to sell side, lots of different roles that are called out. That's the stakeholder framework. The second is the use cases. What are you trying to solve for in your in advertising? In the TV space in the US, right? So it is a little bit of a refined, even though it's still a broad topic area, it's refined down to US TV, and what are those use cases? The third is the privacy framework, which is all about taking those use cases and evaluating their durability, their sort of projected durability in the face of not only the state level laws and potential federal privacy laws, but also, and nobody said it yet, the platform policies from Apple, Google, TV device manufacturers, TV operating system providers, all of these different constituents who have various control over what data can and can't be shared and set policy. And then the final piece, very significantly, is the solutions framework. And that goes into what are the established solutions, what's more emerging as a set of solutions. All these are categories of solutions, about 35 of them, as Ashwini said. And then finally, what's a set of enabling technologies that can support one or more categories of solutions. So that's a lot, but the intent is in the heat map that's at the end that we provided our point of view based on our existing expertise and lots of interviews and additional research of how the 35 or so categories of solutions net out in privacy durability, both in terms of the state and platform policy privacy components, but then efficiency for deploying and operating the category of solution, and finally, where it sort of sits in industry adoption. And we left one field, very importantly, open, which we called utility. And that we left that blank because it's very much in the eye of the beholder as we looked at it. And it invites, the whole point here is it invites you to take the report and take our starting point and literally create your own spreadsheet, right? Here are the different categories of solutions and even specific providers that I use today. Here are some that maybe I should consider going forward. Take our point of view on how durable they may be from a privacy standpoint, and then layer in your consideration of how high is the utility of that solution versus the privacy durability and privacy risk. So it's a starting point, and hopefully putting some structure around a really complex topic, the most complex of which, part of which is probably the privacy framework.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Hi, everyone, I'm Julia Schulman, and also want to say it was wonderful working with both Dennis and Forays and Sim on this project. And despite being the person with the legal and public policy background at this table, I just want to emphasize for folks that the reason we think this is so important is not so that you can take this framework and hand it off to your lawyers and have them work on this in a silo. The major point around this is privacy can't be managed just through contracts and consent banners, and we want to emphasize to everyone in this room, if Dennis didn't already hit it, we are trying to provide you with a framework to ensure that you can still do business, either the way that you're doing it today, but frankly, in a different way. So you can't just paper over everything with a contract. You're looking at your use cases, you're looking at the various vendors and technology you are using for those use cases, like planning, measurement, reporting, targeting, et cetera, and thinking about who's going to be here in the next 1 to 5 years, because the industry is going to look very different. And if you think about this as just a legal and a compliance problem, you're gonna miss the boat and you're gonna be unable to go out and actually conduct business the way that you're conducting it today. So this framework is really important to sit down at a table with not just your lawyers, but also your product folks that think through whatever vendors you're using, or if you are a vendor, what these various regulations and platform policies are going to do to your product and your strategy and your ability to continue to conduct business. And that's why this was such an amazing project to work on, and why we think it's incredibly useful and important for folks and to help them educate themselves and their teams.
Yeah, so I want to repeat 2 points. One is, whenever you get the report, either from the Foray site or you ask us for it and I'll email it to you, the heat map framework that you see is a point of view. Those colors are not hard-coded. Those are what we think are the current state. What Julia mentioned is probably the most important. This is not a contractual question. This is a question about the existence of a solution or not. If you are if you are offering attribution services, in 12 months, you are going to have to map against 15 state privacy laws, which is a nightmare to even think about right now. And so what do you want that solution to be? How are you going to get the consent? Basically, this is about consent. Has the user given you the consent to track them or not? And so before this becomes a legal or a contractual question, and the reason we put it at decisions and on this stage right now is if you really want to build for sustained growth, you have to exist to build for sustained growth. Privacy is an issue. It's become an issue now in the US, where your business itself could be fundamentally impacted if you don't understand what's really happening. And so I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm repeating it. And this is not a gloom and doom scenario. This is a fantastic framework that all of you could go and color code however you want, add more categories to it. But this is a good starting point that we thought would be very useful for the entire industry.
Can I add one point there?
Yeah.
No, I think spot on, I think. And then additionally, there is no one solution or one category of solutions that will work just period, and satisfy all of your business needs going forward, right? It has to be a sort of, a portfolio, as we joke, right? Because we've said this for years, but a portfolio of solutions that is custom tailored to who you are as a stakeholder in the industry, to what, which of the use cases, the planning, activation, measurement, more specifically within each of those, which use cases are most important to you or your clients or your partners, and then it's really netting out to who do I work with, what do I do myself, what do I think about contractually, and how do I think about consent, for example, but also how do I think about the scenarios where I don't have consent, and I still need to operate an advertising business, and so there are a number of solutions to consider there, for example, but it has to be a blend of a number of solutions.
Yeah, and I would add on top of consent and contract, just to hammer home here. So a lot of the data that you all access, use for various use cases is no longer going to be available because certain platforms are no longer making it available, or it's harder to get your hands on because a user maybe didn't consent, or a various provider is just no longer making it available. So just think about that as well. Not just consent, but also you might not be able to get access to what you used to use in the past.
Yep. Lot more questions. I think the audience may also have submitted a few questions. And so in the interest of time, John, I'll have one question for you, and then we can turn it over to Kevin. From SIM's perspective, since the organization focuses on measurement first, how do you think this is going to impact? It's a very big, broad, loaded question. So in like 1 minute, how do you think it will impact the measurement ecosystem overall?
How do you think privacy or this study or both?
Privacy.
I think it's very uncertain at this point in time. So I think we haven't yet had a huge data privacy scandal in the measurement world. Yeah. We've had lots of them in the media and advertising ecosystem, but I don't think we've quite yet had one in the measurement space. And I think, when I talk to the major measurement vendors, I think they're extremely reputable companies building on data sets that they have a pretty solid understanding of. I think where it gets more complicated is when we start moving into targeting and addressability. Yeah. And the use of data for use cases which are adjacent and often highly integrated, but are slightly separate to kind of pure media measurement. And I think it's in those areas where there are still questions and concerns. And I think it's probably worth saying, a point that Dennis and Julia make, there are some areas where we're guessing what the likely restrictions look like, but until we've had more test cases and we really know and understand how certain things to be interpreted, it's quite hard to know. Yeah. I think the other big point I think is about trust. I think it's that we now operate in a much more interconnected ecosystem, and it's not viable for every individual company to do a detailed audit on every single other partner the whole way down the supply chain. So we have to find frameworks and better ways of doing this. And I think there's some important work the IAB is doing in that space. I think people have probably heard of Richie Glassberg and sort of his group who are doing really fantastic stuff. I think more of that, the more we talk about this and are aware of the issues, the better.
So, Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you in case, you have a question or two. I think we have time for one, probably.
I do. We might get a couple in here. So how can the average media planner pressure test a publisher or DSP or ad tech's ability to be privacy compliant, as a lot's wrapped up in jargon that sounds really good? Maybe another way to say that is, how much trust can marketers place in technology platforms and their ability to handle privacy?
I can kick this one off. Yeah, since I spent a lot of time thinking about it, building into it, and pressure testing. So there's, to John's point, there's a couple different ways to do this. I think number one, this is why we created the framework that we had up on here before. So you run the various solutions through that framework and really pressure test and ask those questions. But the second piece is some of the other industry groups like the IAB are actually coming out with standardized questionnaires and also standardized technical controls that will be able to test against these various solutions and be able to come out on the other end and say, oh, they said they were doing X, Y, and Z. We actually know they are doing X, Y, and Z because we've conducted not just a questionnaire audit that people can frankly fill in and maybe fudge, but we've also run a variety of different technical controls through the solution, and it's come out on the other end, and they are doing what they say they do.
And yeah, probably not surprisingly, there's a lot behind the heat map framework, right? And the privacy framework itself is a very kind of methodical approach of thinking through the types of data you have, the sources of that data, et cetera. So there's a lot, I think, in the report that can also just help guide through that process and just make us all better and more effective in how we interact with vendors and partners and ask them the right questions.
Yeah. On that note, unfortunately, we have to end this. Definitely, please go access the report from the Forays site. And I think we're going to have this discussion again this year for sure, because there's so much happening. So on that note, thank you, John, Dennis, Julia, for joining us on here at
Thank you.
Decision.
Thank you.